Mile marker 47. Interstate 25 North. 6:45 a.m. Daniel Hoffman spots the black Mercedes tilted against the guardrail through his cracked windshield. Steam rises from the hood. A woman emerges from the driver's seat. Expensive black suit. Graying hair pulled back severely. Manicured hands now dirty from examining the flat tire. She looks around desperately, clutching a leather briefcase like a lifeline, her polished exterior cracking with each passing minute. Dan checks his watch. 43 minutes until his interview at Reynolds Tech. 43 minutes until his last shot at providing for Lucy. The woman's shoulders slump in defeat. Something about her posture reminds him of himself after Caroline died. Broken, alone, fighting invisible battles. His Honda slows without permission from his brain. Through her expensive clothes and perfect makeup, Dan sees something that stops his heart cold. The same look Carolyn had in her hospital bed when she whispered her final words. "Promise me you'll never stop helping people." Dan pulls over, knowing this decision will change everything. He just doesn't know how much. The woman looks up as Dan's Honda crunches to a stop behind her Mercedes. Her eyes widen with surprise, then narrow with suspicion. A stranger stopping on a deserted stretch of highway could mean anything. Dan steps out slowly, hands visible, the way Caroline taught him when Lucy was afraid of new people. "Ma'am, I saw your tire. Looks like you could use some help." His voice carries the soft Colorado drawl that 3 generations of Hoffmans have spoken. The woman studies his face, searching for hidden motives. Dan's wearing his only good suit, the navy one Caroline bought him for their anniversary 5 years ago. She notices the frayed cuffs, the careful way he's pressed the wrinkles from fabric that's seen better days. Something in his eyes makes her shoulders relax slightly. There's no predatory calculation there, no expectation of reward. Just the quiet concern of someone who recognizes distress and wants to help. "I have a meeting," she says, her voice crisp with authority but tinged with desperation. "A very important meeting that I absolutely cannot miss." Margaret Reynolds has built her reputation on punctuality, on being the person others could depend upon. Now she's stranded like some helpless damsel in a fairy tale. Dan nods, already moving toward her trunk. "Let's get you back on the road, then." He doesn't ask her name, doesn't probe about the meeting. Margaret watches him remove his suit jacket, fold it carefully, and roll up his sleeves. His movements are deliberate, practiced. These are hands that have fixed things before. The tire iron feels familiar in Dan's grip. 8 months of unemployment have meant plenty of roadside repairs on his aging Honda. He works quickly, methodically, aware of time slipping away like sand through his fingers. Margaret finds herself studying his profile as he works. "You're going to be late for something too, aren't you?" she asks quietly. Dan pauses, tire iron halfway to the next lug nut. "Yeah, job interview." He doesn't elaborate, doesn't complain. Just continues working as if helping strangers is more important than his own problems. Margaret processes this information, recognizing sacrifice when she sees it. In her world, time equals money, and this man is spending both to help someone he's never met. 23 minutes later, Dan tightens the last lug nut and stands, brushing dirt from his hands. Margaret's spare tire isn't perfect, but it'll get her where she needs to go. She opens her purse, pulling out a business card and several crisp $100 bills. "Please, let me pay you for your time, and here's my card in case you ever need anything." Dan glances at the money, then at her face. The bills would cover Lucy's school lunch account for 3 months. He hands everything back. "Just glad I could help, Mom." Margaret stares at the returned money, genuinely shocked. In her world, everyone has a price. Every favor comes with strings attached. People help her because of who she is, what she can do for them. This stranger helped her simply because she needed help. At least tell me your name, she insists as Dan walks back to his Honda. He pauses at his driver's door, one hand on the handle. Daniel Hoffman. And I hope your meeting goes well. He slides into his car without looking back, leaving Margaret standing beside her Mercedes with questions multiplying in her mind. She watches his taillights disappear around the bend, then checks her watch. She'll make her board meeting with minutes to spare. But something about Daniel Hoffman has left an impression deeper than tire marks on asphalt. She memorizes his license plate number, though she's not entirely sure why. Dan arrives at Reynolds Tech Solutions with sweat stains on his shirt and grease under his fingernails. The sleek glass building rises 30 floors into the Colorado sky, a monument to success that makes his Honda look like a toy in the parking lot. He checks his reflection in the side mirror, does what he can to clean up, and straightens the blue tie Caroline gave him. The elevator ride to the 22nd floor feels like ascending to Judgment Day. His stomach churns with the knowledge that he's exactly 17 minutes late. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and designer clothes, looks up from her computer with barely concealed disdain. "You must be Daniel Hoffman," Jessica says, her tone suggesting he's already failed some unspoken test. Mr. Peterson is not pleased about the delay. She doesn't offer him water or a place to sit, just points toward a cluster of uncomfortable-looking chairs near the window. Dan takes a seat, watching other candidates in expensive suits check their phones and review portfolio folders. He's older than most of them, his resume gap glaringly obvious. 8 months of driving for rideshare companies and fixing computers in people's homes doesn't exactly scream senior engineer material. The minutes tick by like hours. Other candidates are called in, emerging 30 minutes later with either triumphant smiles or defeated expressions. Nobody emerges with the cautious optimism that Dan carries like a fragile flame. Each passing minute makes his tardiness more obvious, more damaging to whatever slim chances he might have had. Frank Peterson appears in the doorway at exactly 9:47 a.m., his expression suggesting that Daniel's tardiness has personally offended him. He's a thin man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and the bearing of someone who has never been late for anything in his entire life. "Mr. Hoffman," he says coldly, not extending his hand. "I trust you have an explanation for your tardiness." Dan stands, feeling every eye in the waiting area turn toward him. "Yes, sir. I stopped to help someone with a flat tire on the highway." The words sound weak even to his own ears, like the excuse of a man who doesn't take opportunities seriously. Frank's eyebrows rise slightly, as if he's just confirmed every assumption he made about Daniel's character. Behind him, other employees have begun to gather, drawn by the unusual drama unfolding in their sterile corporate environment. Dan can feel their judgment like a physical weight, the collective disapproval of people who have never missed an appointment. "Mr. Hoffman, we at Reynolds Tech value punctuality above almost everything else. Our clients depend on us to meet deadlines, to be where we say we'll be when we say we'll be there." Frank's voice carries the weight of absolute authority. "I'm sure you understand that showing up late to an interview doesn't exactly inspire confidence in your reliability." Dan feels the weight of 8 months of rejection settling on his shoulders like snow. He thinks about Lucy eating cereal for dinner again. "I understand, sir," Dan says quietly. "But if someone needs help, I'm going to help them. That's just who I am." Frank's expression doesn't soften. If anything, it grows more rigid. The moral certainty in Dan's voice seems to offend him more than the tardiness itself. "Mr. Hoffman, I'm afraid we've already identified several candidates who demonstrated the professionalism to arrive on time. Perhaps you can apply again in 6 months." The words hit Dan like a physical blow. 6 months might as well be 6 years. Lucy needs stability now. She needs a father who can provide for her, not a man who makes noble gestures while his daughter wears shoes with holes in them. Dan nods once, the gesture of a man who has learned to accept disappointment with dignity. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Peterson." He turns toward the elevator, each step feeling like walking through quicksand. The other candidates avoid eye contact, probably relieved that someone else's failure makes their own chances marginally better. The elevator doors open like the mouth of a cave, ready to swallow him back into the darkness of unemployment. Dan steps inside and presses the button for the ground floor, watching the numbers count down like the seconds of his remaining hope. When the doors open again, he'll walk back to his car and figure out how to explain to Lucy why Daddy still doesn't have a job. But the elevator stops at the 28th floor, and the doors open to reveal Margaret Reynolds. She steps inside, immaculate in her black suit, looking every inch the successful executive, except for the slight softness around her eyes that wasn't there an hour ago. Dan blinks, certain he's hallucinating from stress and desperation. The morning has been surreal enough without impossible coincidences. "Daniel," she says simply, as if running into him in the elevator of a random office building is the most natural thing in the world. Small world. Her voice carries a warmth that wasn't there on the highway. "Mom," he manages, his voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" Margaret tilts her head slightly, studying his face with the intensity of someone solving a complex puzzle. She notices the defeat in his posture, the way his shoulders have curved inward like he's protecting himself from another blow. The confident man who changed her tire has been replaced by someone who looks like he's been systematically broken down by institutional rejection. "I work here, Daniel. This is my company." The words hang in the air between them like smoke. Dan's mind races through the implications, the impossible chain of events that led him to help the CEO of the company that just rejected him. Margaret watches understanding dawn in his eyes, followed quickly by embarrassment and something that might be anger. She's seen that look before, in the mirror, when circumstances beyond her control threatened everything she'd worked to build. The recognition creates an unexpected sense of kinship between them. "Your interview," she says, not really asking. "It didn't go well." Dan laughs, but there's no humor in it. "I was 17 minutes late because I stopped to help you. Mr. Peterson made it clear that punctuality trumps everything else at Reynolds Tech." He doesn't say it accusingly, doesn't demand gratitude or special treatment, just states the facts with the weary acceptance of a man who has learned that good deeds don't always lead to good outcomes. Margaret feels something twist in her chest, a combination of guilt and admiration that catches her off guard. In her world, everyone wants something from her. Everyone has an angle, a hidden agenda, a way they hope to benefit from her success and influence. But Daniel Hoffman helped her because she needed help, not because he knew who she was or what she could do for him. The purity of that motivation is so rare in her experience that it feels almost mythical. The elevator reaches the ground floor, but Margaret doesn't move towards the doors. Instead, she presses the button for the 22nd floor. The mechanical hum fills the silence as they begin to ascend again. "Daniel, would you mind coming back upstairs with me? I think there's been a misunderstanding." Her voice carries the quiet authority of someone who has spent decades making decisions that affect thousands of people. Dan hesitates, pride warring with desperation in his chest. He doesn't want charity, doesn't want to be the beneficiary of guilt-driven corporate mercy. But Lucy's face flashes in his mind, her 8-year-old optimism asking if Daddy got the job yet. "Yes, Mom," he says finally. "I'll come back up." Margaret strides through the 22nd floor like a general surveying a battlefield. Employees straighten in their chairs as she passes, conversations stopping mid-sentence in the wake of her presence. She moves with the confident grace of someone who has never doubted her right to be in any room she enters. Frank Peterson emerges from his office, his face lighting up with the practiced smile of a middle manager who has spotted his meal ticket. "Ms. Reynolds, I wasn't expecting you on this floor today. How did the Samsung meeting go?" His voice carries the eager deference of a man who has built his career on reading the moods of his superiors. Margaret's expression doesn't change, but something in her eyes makes Frank's smile falter slightly. The temperature in the room seems to drop several degrees. "Frank, I understand you just interviewed Daniel Hoffman here." She gestures toward Dan, who stands slightly behind her, looking like a man who has wandered into someone else's dream. Frank's face goes through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, and then something approaching horror as he begins to understand the implications. "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Hoffman was significantly late for his appointment. 17 minutes, to be precise. I felt it was important to maintain our standards regarding punctuality." Margaret nods slowly, the gesture of someone who is carefully controlling her temper. The office falls silent except for the distant hum of air conditioning and the rapid typing of people who desperately want to avoid becoming collateral damage. "And did you ask Mr. Hoffman why he was late?" Her voice is dangerously quiet, the tone that seasoned employees recognize as the calm before a very expensive storm. Frank shifts uncomfortably, suddenly aware that this conversation is not going according to the script he had prepared. He mentioned something about helping someone with a flat tire, but Ms. Reynolds, surely you understand that we can't make exceptions based on every sob story. We have standards to maintain. The words hang in the air like a confession. Margaret's expression doesn't change, but everyone in the immediate vicinity suddenly finds urgent reasons to focus on their computer screens. Frank has just called his CEO's rescue a sob story, though he doesn't realize it yet. Frank," Margaret says, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet office. "The person Daniel stopped to help was me." The silence that follows is so complete that Dan can hear his own heartbeat. Frank's face cycles through confusion, disbelief, and then a pale recognition of career-ending disaster. Jessica drops her pen, the small sound echoing like a gunshot in the stillness. Other employees exchange glances that communicate entire conversations about office politics and the unpredictable nature of corporate hierarchies. Margaret continues speaking in the same measured tone. "If Daniel hadn't stopped to help me, I would have missed our board meeting with Samsung. That meeting secured a $50 million contract that will keep this company profitable for the next 3 years." Frank opens his mouth, then closes it again like a fish gasping for oxygen. His face has gone from pale to red to a sickly greenish color that suggests his breakfast is considering a return engagement. "Ms. Reynolds, I had no idea. I never would have, if I had known—" His words trail off as he realizes that every syllable is digging his grave deeper. Margaret holds up one hand, a gesture that immediately silences him. "You had no idea because you didn't ask. You made an assumption about Daniel's character based on his tardiness without considering that there might be circumstances beyond his control." Her words carry the weight of a judgment that will be remembered long after today's crisis has passed. Dan watches the exchange with fascination and growing discomfort, feeling like a prize being fought over by forces beyond his understanding. The corporate theater unfolding around him feels surreal, like he's been transported into a business school case study about leadership and judgment. Margaret's defense of him is gratifying, but it also highlights how arbitrary corporate success can be. One moment he's unemployable, the next he's the hero who saved a $50 million deal. "Daniel," Margaret says, turning toward him with an expression that has softened considerably. "I'd like to offer you a position as Senior Design Engineer, reporting directly to me. The salary is $85,000 annually, with full benefits and a signing bonus to help you get settled." The offer hits Dan like a physical blow. $85,000 is more money than he's seen in 3 years. It's Lucy's college fund, it's car repairs and winter coats and the kind of stability he's been chasing like a mirage. But something about the way it's being offered, in front of Frank's humiliation and Jessica's shocked expression, makes his stomach churn. This isn't how he wanted to earn his way back into the professional world. This feels like charity dressed up as justice, and charity has never sat well with Daniel Hoffman. The money would solve every immediate problem in his life, but accepting it this way would create a different kind of problem, one that might be harder to live with than financial insecurity. "Ms. Reynolds," he says carefully, "I appreciate the offer, but I want to earn any position I get here. I don't want special treatment because I happened to help you this morning." His words surprise everyone, including himself. Margaret studies his face with renewed interest, seeing something in his expression that most people spend their entire careers trying to fake. Integrity, she realizes, is rarer in corporate America than quarterly profits or employee satisfaction. Margaret smiles for the first time since entering the building, a genuine expression that transforms her face from corporate authority to someone Dan might actually want to work for. "Daniel, you've just demonstrated exactly why this company needs you. Frank, I'll be conducting Daniel's interview myself. Please clear my schedule for the next hour." It's not a request. Frank nods so vigorously that Dan worries the man might injure his neck. "Of course, Ms. Reynolds, right away." The elevator ride to the 30th floor passes in contemplative silence. Dan uses the time to study Margaret's reflection in the polished steel doors, trying to reconcile the desperate woman from the highway with the commanding executive standing beside him. She seems taller somehow, more substantial, as if corporate authority adds physical weight to her presence. But he can still see traces of the vulnerability he witnessed that morning, the crack in her polished exterior that revealed someone who understood what it meant to need help. Margaret's office occupies a corner of the building with floor-to-ceiling windows that offer a panoramic view of Cedar Valley stretching toward the mountains. It's the kind of view that reminds people how small their problems are in the grand scheme of things. The furniture is expensive but not ostentatious, chosen for comfort and functionality rather than intimidation. Bookshelves line one wall, filled with technical manuals, business texts, and what appear to be personal photographs. Margaret gestures toward a leather chair across from her desk, then settles into her own chair with the fluid motion of someone who has spent decades perfecting the art of executive presence. "Tell me about your background, Daniel. What brought you to Colorado?" Her voice has lost the hard edge it carried downstairs, replaced by genuine curiosity. Dan shifts in his chair, still uncomfortable with the surreal turn his morning has taken. The office feels like a different world from the rejection he experienced just 30 minutes earlier. "I'm originally from Denver, went to Colorado State for mechanical engineering, then worked for a startup called Innovate Tech for 8 years. We developed smart home systems before that was really a thing." He pauses, weighing how much personal information to share. The details of his life feel insignificant in this rarefied corporate atmosphere, but Margaret's expression suggests genuine interest rather than polite tolerance. "My wife Caroline got sick 3 years ago. Cancer. I took a leave of absence to care for her. And then after she passed, I just never went back." Margaret nods slowly, understanding flickering in her eyes. She's seen enough resumes and heard enough sob stories to recognize genuine grief when it's presented without manipulation or self-pity. The way Dan talks about his wife suggests love rather than martyrdom, sacrifice made willingly rather than resentfully. "I'm sorry for your loss. Taking care of family takes courage." Dan's hands rest carefully on the arms of his chair, and she notices he still wears his wedding ring. "What have you been doing since then?" The question isn't accusatory, just curious. Dan takes a breath, preparing to explain the gap in his resume that has been poison to every other potential employer. Freelance work mostly. Computer repair, some consulting for small businesses, driving for a rideshare company when things got tight, anything that let me be available for my daughter Lucy. The admission feels like weakness, but Margaret's expression doesn't change. If anything, she seems to respect his honesty about the economic realities of single parenthood. "How old is Lucy?" Margaret asks, and something in her tone suggests this isn't small talk. Dan's entire posture changes when he talks about his daughter, his shoulders straightening and his voice taking on a warmth that wasn't there before. 8. She's in 3rd grade at Cedar Valley Elementary, wants to be an astronaut or a veterinarian depending on the day. Margaret smiles at this, remembering her own childhood dreams that changed with the seasons. "She sounds remarkable. What does she think about you potentially starting a new job?" Dan considers the question seriously, as if Lucy's opinion carries weight in his decision-making process. She's excited about the idea of Daddy having a real job again. She's been eating a lot of cereal for dinner lately, and she's too smart not to notice. The admission is matter-of-fact rather than self-pitying, but it reveals the kind of sacrifice that 8-year-olds shouldn't have to witness. Margaret opens a folder on her desk and pulls out a sheet of paper. "Daniel, I've been thinking about this company's direction lately. We've grown rapidly, but we've lost something in the process. We've become so focused on efficiency and profit margins that we've forgotten what really matters." She slides the paper across the desk toward him. It's a job description, but not the one Frank had been planning to offer. This position involves leading a new division focused on community outreach and sustainable technology development. "I don't just want to hire you because you helped me this morning. I want to hire you because you represent something this company needs to remember about itself." Dan reads through the job description, his eyes widening as he absorbs the scope of the position. It's not just a job, it's an opportunity to shape the direction of a major corporation. The responsibilities include developing partnerships with local schools, creating technology solutions for underserved communities, and leading initiatives that prioritize social impact alongside profitability. "Ms. Reynolds, this is incredibly generous, but I have to ask, are you sure you want to make this decision based on one morning? You don't really know me." Margaret leans back in her chair, studying his face with the calculating gaze of someone who has built a career on reading people accurately. "Daniel, in my experience, how someone acts when they think no one important is watching tells you everything you need to know about their character. This morning, you thought you were helping a stranded stranger. You had no idea who I was or what I could do for you. That's exactly the kind of judgment I want making decisions for this company." The offer hanging between them feels too good to be true, the kind of life-changing opportunity that happens to other people in movies and motivational speeches. Dan thinks about Lucy waiting for him at Mrs. Henderson's house, probably helping with chores to earn the extra hour of afternoon care they can barely afford. This job would change everything, but something about accepting it still feels premature, like making a commitment before fully understanding the implications. "I need some time to think about this," he says finally. Margaret nods, as if she expected this response. "Of course. Take the weekend. But Daniel, I want you to understand something. This isn't charity. This company needs what you have to offer, and not just your engineering skills. We need someone who remembers that business is ultimately about people helping people solve problems." 2 weeks later, Dan sits in his new office on the 25th floor, still unable to quite believe the view from his window. The nameplate on his door reads, "Daniel Hoffman, Director of Community Innovation," a title that sounds important enough to impress Lucy's teachers, but vague enough to let him figure out what it actually means. His first project involves developing a partnership between Reynolds Tech and local schools to provide computer programming classes for underprivileged kids. It's the kind of initiative that makes him think Caroline would be proud. But not everyone at Reynolds Tech is thrilled with the new hire who skipped the normal corporate hierarchy. Brad Collins, the former lead engineer who expected to get Dan's position, makes his displeasure known through a series of subtle professional sabotages. Important emails somehow never reach Dan's inbox. Meeting times get changed without notification. Technical specifications arrive incomplete or incorrect, forcing Dan to scramble to catch up on projects that should have been straightforward. Kevin Marsh, Brad's closest ally, takes a more direct approach to expressing his dissatisfaction. He questions Dan's qualifications in team meetings, always phrasing his challenges as helpful clarifications. Dan, could you explain your experience with this type of system integration? I want to make sure we're all on the same page. The words are professional, but the tone carries an undercurrent of skepticism that everyone in the room recognizes. Kevin has been with Reynolds Tech for 12 years, working his way up through every level of the engineering department. The real test comes during his first major presentation to the engineering department. Dan has spent weeks developing a proposal for a new smart home security system that could revolutionize the market. His design elegantly solves problems that the industry has been struggling with for years, integrating multiple technologies in ways that seem obvious only after someone else has figured them out. But as he begins his presentation, he realizes that half the room has already decided to hate whatever he proposes. Brad sits in the front row with his arms crossed, his expression suggesting that he's personally offended by Dan's existence. Kevin takes notes with exaggerated attention, preparing to find flaws in every detail. The hostility is palpable, but Dan pushes forward with his presentation, focusing on the technical merits of his proposal rather than the political undercurrents. The current market approach focuses on individual components, Dan explains, clicking through slides that illustrate his integrated system design. But what consumers really want is seamless connectivity that doesn't require a computer science degree to operate. His proposal involves creating a hub device that automatically configures itself based on the specific needs of each household, learning usage patterns, and adapting accordingly. It's innovative without being intimidating, sophisticated without being complicated. The few engineers who aren't predetermined to oppose him begin to nod approvingly, recognizing the commercial potential of his approach. Brad raises his hand before Dan finishes explaining the technical specifications. This is an interesting academic exercise, but how do you propose we manufacture something this complex at a competitive price point? His question sounds reasonable, but the emphasis on academic exercise carries a clear implication that Dan's ideas exist only in theory. Kevin immediately follows up with a related concern about integration challenges and production pipeline restructuring. Their questions aren't technically wrong, but they're designed to highlight obstacles rather than explore solutions. Those are valid concerns, Dan acknowledges, refusing to take the bait. But consider this, the current market is fragmented because no one has been willing to tackle the integration challenge. We have an opportunity to define the next generation of smart home technology instead of just following trends established by our competitors. He clicks to his next slide, which shows market research data supporting his assertions. The data suggests significant consumer demand for exactly the kind of integrated solution he's proposing. The meeting ends without resolution, which Dan recognizes as a minor victory. In corporate environments, revolutionary ideas rarely get unanimous approval on first presentation. But he's planted seeds, started conversations, demonstrated that he belongs in rooms where important decisions get made. The key is patience, building credibility through consistent delivery rather than demanding immediate acceptance. Margaret catches up with Dan as he's gathering his presentation materials, her expression suggesting approval of his handling of the situation. "Walk with me," she says, a request that somehow feels more like guidance than an order. They move through the hallway towards the elevator, passing cubicles where employees pretend not to watch their conversation. The political theatre of corporate hierarchy never stops, but Margaret has learned to use it rather than be controlled by it. "What did you think of the reception?" she asks once the elevator doors close. Dan considers his words carefully, aware that his answer will reveal as much about his character as his technical competence. "About what I expected. Change is threatening, especially when it comes from someone who hasn't earned their trust yet." Margaret nods approvingly. She's seen too many new hires either crumble under criticism or respond with defensive arrogance. Dan's realistic assessment suggests emotional maturity that can't be taught. The elevator reaches the parking garage, but neither of them moves towards the doors. "The idea is solid," Margaret continues. "More than solid, actually. It could position us as market leaders for the next decade." Dan senses there's more to her evaluation. "But," he prompts. Margaret smiles slightly, recognizing his ability to read subtext. "But implementing it will require political capital that you haven't accumulated yet. Brad and Kevin aren't just being difficult, they represent a significant portion of our engineering talent. If they decide to actively oppose this project, they can make implementation nearly impossible." Her words aren't discouraging so much as educational, the kind of corporate reality check that separates successful executives from brilliant failures. "What do you suggest?" Dan asks, genuinely curious about her perspective. Margaret has been navigating corporate hierarchies since before he graduated from college. Her insights could save him months of trial and error. "Prove yourself on something smaller first. Build credibility through execution, not just innovation. Show them that you can deliver results within existing systems before asking them to embrace revolutionary change." 3 months into his tenure at Reynolds Tech, Dan has begun to find his rhythm. His smaller projects have been successful enough to earn grudging respect from some of his colleagues. The computer programming classes for local elementary schools have generated positive media coverage for the company and enthusiastic feedback from teachers and parents. His proposal for upgrading the employee breakroom technology was implemented without controversy and has improved daily life for everyone in the building. These victories feel minor compared to his grand vision for smart home integration, but they're building the credibility Margaret warned him he would need. Even Kevin has begun to acknowledge his contributions, though Brad remains consistently skeptical of everything Dan proposes. The gradual shift in department dynamics suggests that patience and competence will eventually overcome initial resistance. Dan learns to navigate the subtle politics of corporate life while maintaining focus on meaningful work. The breakthrough comes during Reynolds Tech's quarterly crisis. Their primary server system experiences a cascading failure on the Friday before a major product launch, threatening to derail months of preparation and cost the company millions in lost revenue. The IT department works through the night trying to restore functionality, but the problem runs deeper than anyone initially realized. Data corruption has spread through multiple redundant systems, and the backup protocols have failed in ways that nobody anticipated. Margaret calls an emergency meeting for key personnel, hoping that fresh perspectives might identify solutions that sleep-deprived technicians have missed. Dan arrives at the office to find the parking lot full despite the weekend, a sure sign that something significant has gone wrong. The elevator carries him to a war room atmosphere where engineers huddle around computer screens displaying error messages and system diagnostics. Brad looks like he hasn't slept in 36 hours, his usually perfect hair disheveled and his shirt wrinkled. "How bad is it?" Dan asks, studying the wall-mounted displays that show system status across the company's entire network. Brad looks up from his keyboard with exhaustion and frustration. "We're looking at complete data loss across 3 major client accounts. The backup systems failed to maintain integrity during the initial crash, and now we're dealing with cascading corruption that's spreading faster than we can isolate it." His explanation carries the weight of someone who understands that his career might not survive this level of failure. Dan moves to an available workstation and begins examining the error logs, his mind automatically organizing the information into patterns and relationships. Years of troubleshooting complex systems have taught him to look beyond immediate symptoms toward underlying causes. Something in the error patterns triggers a memory from his startup days when they faced a similar crisis with their smart home network. "This isn't random corruption," he says slowly, his mind working through possibilities. "Look at the sequence of failures. The pattern suggests a memory allocation problem that's creating recursive loops in the backup protocols." Brad stops typing and looks over with skeptical interest. "That's impossible. Our backup systems are completely isolated from the main application processes." Dan nods, understanding Brad's confusion. The isolation should prevent exactly the kind of cross-contamination he's describing. "They're supposed to be isolated, but what if the security update created an unintended bridge between systems?" Working together, the team begins to implement Dan's solution. It requires temporarily shutting down all client-facing applications, a decision that will cost the company revenue but might save them from complete disaster. Brad and Kevin, their earlier hostility forgotten in the face of genuine crisis, follow Dan's lead as he guides them through the process of isolating the rogue security update. The collaboration feels natural, professional resentment temporarily set aside in favor of solving urgent problems. 8 hours later, the crisis is over. Client data has been restored, systems are functioning normally, and the company has avoided what could have been a catastrophic failure. The war room slowly empties as exhausted engineers head home to sleep off their heroic weekend effort. Brad approaches Dan before leaving, extending his hand with genuine respect. "I owe you an apology," he says simply. "I've been judging you based on how you got here instead of what you can actually do. Today you saved all our jobs." Kevin echoes the sentiment, his earlier skepticism replaced by grudging admiration. "That memory allocation insight was brilliant. I've been looking at those error patterns for hours without seeing what you spotted in minutes." The acknowledgement feels better than any formal recognition Dan could receive. Earning the respect of colleagues who initially opposed him validates his technical competence while establishing the foundation for future collaboration. Margaret finds Dan in the empty war room, staring at the now peaceful system displays. "Feeling good?" she asks, settling into the chair beside him. Dan shrugs, his characteristic humility unchanged by the day's heroics. "Feeling useful. It's been a while since I solved a problem that really mattered." Margaret studies his profile, seeing something in his demeanor that goes beyond professional satisfaction. The server crisis has transformed him from charity case to valued team member, but more importantly, it's restored his confidence in his own abilities. "Caroline would be proud," she says quietly. The words hit Dan unexpectedly, bringing tears to his eyes that he quickly blinks away. Margaret is right. Caroline always believed that his greatest strength was his ability to see solutions that others missed. Today, for the first time since her death, he feels worthy of that faith. The healing process isn't complete, but something fundamental has shifted in how he sees himself and his place in the world. 1 year later, Dan stands at the podium of the Reynolds Tech Auditorium, accepting the company's Innovation Award for his smart home integration system. The device has exceeded all sales projections and established Reynolds Tech as the market leader in accessible home automation. More importantly to Dan, it has simplified technology for thousands of families, allowing grandparents to stay safely in their homes longer and giving parents better ways to monitor their children's safety. Lucy sits in the front row, wearing a new dress and her father's engineering pin, which he gave her that morning as a symbol of the partnership they've maintained throughout his career transition. She applauds louder than anyone, her pride evident to everyone in the auditorium. Margaret presents the award with genuine warmth, remembering the desperate woman on the highway who met a kind stranger at exactly the right moment for both of them. The ceremony represents more than individual achievement. It celebrates the transformation of corporate culture. In his acceptance speech, Dan chooses to focus on the collaborative nature of innovation rather than individual achievement. This award represents the work of an entire team of brilliant engineers who taught me that the best solutions come from combining different perspectives and experiences. He acknowledges Brad and Kevin specifically, mentioning how their initial skepticism pushed him to develop better ideas and more thorough implementations. The audience appreciates his humility, recognizing genuine gratitude rather than political theater. The evening concludes with Dan and Lucy at their modest home, sharing pizza and discussing the day's events. Lucy chatters excitedly about meeting the company executives and seeing her father receive recognition for his work. "Daddy, do you think Mommy knows about your award?" she asks, her 8-year-old directness cutting through adult complexity to reach essential truths. Dan considers the question seriously, recognizing that his daughter's understanding of death and memory often surpasses adult sophistication. "I think she does, sweetheart. I think she's proud of both of us." Lucy nods with satisfaction, as if this confirms something she already suspected. "Good, because I told her about it when I talked to her picture this morning." Dan's throat tightens with emotion as he realizes that Lucy has maintained her own relationship with Caroline's memory, independent of his grief and healing process. The continuity of love across death feels less like loss and more like legacy. 5 years later, Dan receives the Presidential Medal for Technology Innovation in the Rose Garden, the highest honor the United States government bestows on civilian scientists and engineers. Lucy, now 13 and preparing for early college admission, stands beside her father as the president describes their collaborative work improving life for millions while establishing new standards for accessible design. The recognition represents the culmination of a journey that began with a simple act of kindness on a Colorado highway. The drive home to Cedar Valley takes them through small towns and rural communities where their assistive technology systems have been installed in senior centers, healthcare facilities, and private homes. They stop for lunch in a restaurant where the elderly owner recognizes Lucy from news coverage and thanks her personally for designing systems that have helped his wife maintain independence despite advancing health challenges. Such encounters remind them why their technical work matters beyond professional recognition. "Daddy," Lucy says as they cross the Colorado state line, "do you think Mommy would be proud of what we've accomplished?" Her question reflects ongoing awareness of Caroline's influence on their values and decision-making processes, recognition that their success has meaning because it honors the memory of someone who believed in serving others. Dan considers his response carefully, wanting to acknowledge Caroline's continuing presence while helping Lucy understand that her own choices have earned the recognition she receives. "I think Mommy would be amazed by what you've become and proud of how you've used your gifts to help people." Their conversation is interrupted by a radio news report about the latest deployment of their assistive technology in a disaster recovery effort, where their systems have provided both practical assistance and emotional comfort during a crisis that threatened safety and independence. Dan and Lucy listen with satisfaction that goes beyond professional pride. The annual Reynolds Tech Holiday Party provides opportunity to celebrate not just corporate success, but the cultural transformation that has made the company a model for values-driven innovation. Dan's original colleagues, including Brad and Kevin, who initially resisted his unconventional hiring, have become close friends and collaborators whose respect was earned through consistent demonstration of competence and character rather than corporate politics or strategic positioning. The relationships represent the kind of professional satisfaction that Caroline always encouraged him to seek. Margaret's speech at the holiday party reflects on the journey that transformed Reynolds Tech from conventional technology company to international leader in socially conscious innovation. We learned that hiring for character rather than credentials can change everything about how a company operates and what it achieves. She tells the assembled employees, many of whom have been inspired by Dan and Lucy's example to pursue projects that serve human needs beyond profit maximization. The evening concludes with Dan and Lucy standing together on the building's observation deck, looking out over the city lights of Cedar Valley while discussing plans for the year ahead. International speaking engagements will take them to conferences where their work has influenced government policies and corporate strategies in dozens of countries. But their most important project involves establishing a foundation that will support other families, pursuing innovation with social impact, creating opportunities for the next generation of engineers. I think Mommy would say that we kept our promise to take care of each other and help other people along the way. Dan answers, his voice carrying confidence that comes from years of choices that honor Caroline's memory, while building a future worthy of Lucy's remarkable potential. The observation deck provides perspective on how far they have traveled from those desperate months when unemployment and grief threatened to overwhelm their small family's capacity for hope and resilience. Their drive home takes them through neighborhoods where assistive technology installations have allowed elderly residents to remain in their own homes rather than moving to institutional care facilities, past the community center where Dan's computer classes have helped dozens of seniors stay connected with distant family members, and alongside the elementary school where Lucy's example has inspired other children to pursue engineering education with social consciousness. These local impacts represent the grassroots foundation that makes their international recognition meaningful.